Protests around the country are driving a new push for accountability over police conduct and spending. But here in Boston, that's also raising questions about the balance of power for controlling the city budget. In other words, the strong mayor form of local government. There's proposals to change that structure from the councilor representing East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End waterfront. We'd like to welcome the councilor from District 1, Lydia Edwards. Thank you very much for being with us, councilor.
Thank you for having me.
Council, I want to ask you about what it was like to vote on the budget under the current form that we have here, because one thing the council could have done was simply say, Mr. Mayor, we're not going to approve this unless you make some changes on it. And of course, that ran through your head as a possibility. It might have been disruptive. So what made you decide to say, no, I'm not going to go there?
Well, because I felt that the real challenge wasn't the issue of whether we should vote up or down. The real issue is that we need to change how we budget in the city of Boston. And that's going to take longer, that's going to take organizing, and that's going to take a huge commitment, grassroots organizing, to change that. In terms of the actual immediate budget vote and moment in time, you know, things had changed since he had introduced the budget. We're in a pandemic. We're dealing with job loss. We're dealing with potential people not getting their jobs in the city of Boston. And the risks on them, basically being placed on them, were too great for me to take. But I am and committed, as I said in my budget speech, that this yes is not a yes to the process. This yes is not a yes to continuing as we are going to continue to go, or to the status quo. This yes is basically saying we need to change and we need to move, but we're not going to do it on someone else's back today.
Well, the way things operate now, and specifically under Mayor Wallace, he has shown some willingness to tweak budgets, even though the city council can't do that much to compel him to do it. What do you want us to see that's different from that?
Well, I want the ability to basically treat this like a $3 billion decision that it is, and up, down, or reduce some is not, it's not enough. It's not a modern city that he wants to help to lead. And ultimately, I want the voters to be at the table. They have more accountability, and they're able to be more transparent and pull me aside than they can with the mayor. I'm up every other year. If they don't like what I'm doing and negotiating about, they can certainly hold me accountable. I want the ability for voters to vote on participatory budgeting, so that they can have money line items set aside directly for voters to say where it's going to be allocated. I want the ability to line item veto, to add certain monies to certain departments. A lot of what people wanted us to do was take money from the police and put it someplace else. We cannot do that. And so I want the ability to negotiate as equal partners with the mayor, because I truly believe that that's how good government works. You have an executive branch and you have a legislative branch, and we need a fully informed and empowered legislative branch.
Under your proposal, a majority of council could take money from one department and put it someplace else, and then send it to the mayor. The mayor can say, I don't like this, I'm going to veto it. And what would happen next?
Then his vetoes, we could override, but we'd have to get a majority of the city council. So it's a back and forth in many cases, that other legislative bodies, the state house, some national government, other cities, New York, Philadelphia, Framingham, other entities have the ability to go back and forth with the mayor, and that's all we're asking for. And personally, I don't see, if it's truly treated as equal partnership, us being in that fight in the end. If we're able to be at the table from the very beginning to help draft, construct, and move this budget, I actually think we'll have more people excited to vote for it, because they could see what they got for their district. They could see what they got for voters. They could see that everything that they've been asked to do and to respond to is reflected in the budget. And it's going to require us to negotiate as well, and compromise amongst ourselves as city councilors. I think it's a good thing. It's democracy.
Well, I know one thing your proposal does is that it focuses us on the difference between redistribution and structure. This certainly would redistribute things potentially, but for people out there who say, no, we need structural change in a way that matters, does this do that?
Yes, and huge difference. It does actually invite more people to the table to help deal with the budgetary process. Again, right now, at the end of the day, it's yes, no, or reduce by a certain amount. That is not structural change, and it cannot be. It's designed to actually prevent it. and that was taken away from the city council in 1909. This is the opposite. This is allowing for city councilors to be able to push and move social agendas, fiscal agendas, reflective of their constituents. So this is structurally different. No, it's not changing, the power dynamics in terms of the mayor. Still a strong mayor, ultimately. But what it does is it helps to assure that on this particular issue, taxpayers' money, taxpayers will actually have more of a voice. And I think that that's what you need in any day, and especially today, excuse me, when we're challenging all of our systems, honestly, in COVID. It's challenging everything. We have to look at things differently. We cannot continue as we've been going.
Well, this is a proposal for charter change, and that means even if there's a majority of the council that wants it, what happens next before this can take effect?
So based on my research under 10B, what happens next is if we, as the city council, approve it, it goes to the attorney general's office. I'm sure the mayor's office has a different understanding that they should also have a say in that process, and we will be talking with them about that understanding. And I'm sure, well, they can, I don't know if they're going to get legal counsel, what they're going to do, but ultimately it has not been done before under 10B, but I don't see how their arguments, how the language is really requiring their approval. But assuming it does, then he can approve something or some form of give and take that he's comfortable with. And then ultimately the constitutionality is placed on it's put to the attorney general for her to determine if the actual question is constitutional. And then it goes to the voters.
One issue that you've been working on quite a bit is housing discrimination. We've recently had this report coming out showing the persistent discrimination is indeed still there, especially against people with rental subsidy vouchers. What needs to happen next?
Councilor O'Malley and I first introduced a hearing order to create our own tester program within the city of Boston. What happens next is we need to be ever vigilant and proactive about seeing who is discriminating against which group, in which neighborhoods, in which real estate agencies, and we need to go after them and prosecute them. That's number one. And it does have a chilling effect when you have a robust funded tester program. It has a chilling effect on discriminatory practices within the real estate agency. Number one. Number two, we need to continue to have discussions about the stigma for folks who have subsidies, and we need to figure out why this is still a hindrance when people are able to compete in the market, that they are seen as less valuable as a tenant. And that's what also Councilor Sabi George, myself, Councilor Bach, and Councilor Bach is on the other hearing order as well, are holding a hearing order about that on Section 8 vouchers. Ultimately, that's the one end of a book end, if you will, in dealing with discrimination. The other end is planning. We need to plan cities that are inclusive. We need to look at the zoning code. Zoning has been the number one way in which we have segregated our neighborhoods. And we need to use that same tool to integrate our neighborhoods and to actually heal from a lot of the discriminatory harms that zoning individuals, zoners, zoning planning folks in the industry have actually created for generations. So we have the amendment.
To my next question, because you've been pushing for a change in the zoning code so that an equity standard can be used. It's been put into place now. So what does that mean?
Well, ultimately, what it does is it's the same way in which we look at all projects. We have several checklists that we run a project through before we approve them in the city of Boston in our zoning. You look at the environmental impact, you look at the traffic impact, and I'm saying you need to look at the racial, ethnic, and discriminatory and displacement impact of a project as well. Because if you don't, you end up with a seaport and you have all sorts of wonderful things built that don't include most Bostonians, don't reflect the diversity, and don't reflect the economic reality of most Bostonians. And so if you do not ask those questions, if you do not ask about the impact, then you will end up with a heavily gentrified, exclusive, segregated neighborhood. And that's what we got. So this is requiring us to work through the same checklist that we do for the environment, the same checklist that we do for the for traffic, and saying we need some agreements and some commitments from developers who want to make money in Boston, that you are also going to help heal and make our city better and more integrated. And that, to me, is the job of the city and the city planners. It's telling developers how you're going to approach and plan and build in Boston. And it's a moral obligation, I feel, as a city that has dealt with racial segregation. It's also a legal obligation under the Fair Housing Act, which requires us to affirmatively further fair housing and take meaningful steps. So I'm saying morally, legally, get it done. And we're still in the process of finishing that zoning amendment. I'm very excited. It'll be one of the first in the country.